In June 2024, Saudi state television reported 51.8 degrees Celsius in the shade at Mecca Grand Mosque. By the end of Hajj, the extreme conditions had completely overwhelmed the region. Thousands of individuals were pushed far beyond the physical limits of the human body after walking for hours beneath direct sunlight. They were beyond the buses and the shelters and the cooling services protecting registered pilgrims. But this is not only a story about what happened during Hajj. It is a story about what Hajj exposed to the entire world. Above 50 degrees survival depends entirely on remaining inside a highly controlled machine of shade and water and transport and cooling. Saudi Arabia is now trying to extend that exact same machine across an entire country. They are building future cities and luxury destinations in a climate that is fundamentally hostile to human biology. So what happens when the machine keeping Saudi Arabia alive must fight the exact same heat, threatening everyone inside it? The most frightening lesson from the summer of 2024 was not simply that Mecca became hot. Saudi Arabia has always known severe heat. The true lesson was that above 50 degrees, the distance between absolute safety and total danger could be measured in something as ordinary as a cooled bus or an air-conditioned tent. During Hajj, some people were tragically left outside that protective network. We saw what the human body endures when it is forcibly separated from mechanical cooling. But what happens when an entire city or a modern metropolis depends on the exact same kind of technological protection? At extreme temperatures, access to cooling is no longer about simple physical comfort. Access becomes literal biological survival. The invisible line separating a functioning modern society from a sudden medical emergency is entirely reliant on artificial infrastructure. It looks like a glass door at the entrance of a mall. On one side of that glass, it is a comfortable 22 degrees. On the other side, it is 52 degrees, and the air burns your lungs. Those who could not endure the extreme conditions during Hajj were the ones disconnected from this grid of survival. Now imagine scaling that terrifying reality up. Think about millions of permanent residents and international tourists and construction workers who must never, under any circumstances, be disconnected from that cooling network. To truly understand the sheer scale of this infrastructural dependency, you have to forget the entire country for a moment. Forget the massive megaprojects and the endless desert highways. Start with just one single room. Imagine a standard modern apartment in the center of Riyadh. It is 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Outside, the temperature is steadily approaching the 50-degree mark. The heavy glass windows are perfectly sealed against the dust and the punishing heat. The thick concrete walls and the reinforced building roof have been absorbing brutal solar radiation for the past 8 hours. Inside the apartment, the air is pleasantly cool and calm. Then the air conditioner simply stops. Think about the psychological and physical timeline of that sudden silence. Minute 0 passes, and the room remains perfectly comfortable. The residual chill from the machine still lingers in the enclosed air. You might not even notice the failure. By minute 15, the atmosphere begins to feel distinctly heavy. The oxygen suddenly feels slightly thinner, and the ambient temperature starts an aggressive upward climb. By minute 30, the physics of the building actively begin to work against you. The glass windows and the concrete walls and even the heavy furniture begin radiating the massive thermal energy they stored all day directly back into your living space. The architecture meant to protect you now transforms into an oven, trapping the heat inside. By minute 60, a healthy adult will feel deeply uncomfortable and drenched in sweat. The panic begins to set in. But for an elderly resident or a newborn child or a patient recovering from a respiratory illness, that temporary inconvenience rapidly becomes a profound physical danger. Their bodies cannot regulate the internal temperature fast enough. How long would you remain calm in that enclosed space as the walls close in? Would you aggressively open the windows hoping for a breeze, only to invite air that is even hotter outside? Or would you keep the rising heat tightly sealed inside the dark room? At what exact point does a mechanical failure become a true human emergency? At these extreme temperatures, air conditioning is absolutely not a luxury decoration for the wealthy. It becomes an integral and non-negotiable part of the biological survival system of the building. Without it, the structure itself turns entirely hostile. But an air conditioner does not create safety entirely on its own. A single machine is just the very end of a much larger chain of survival. It is intimately connected to something far more massive than the building itself. The hotter the environment of Saudi Arabia becomes, the harder millions of individual cooling systems must work simultaneously. The harder those heavy machines work, the more massive amounts of electricity the country must continuously deliver. And demand rises at the exact moment people need that electricity the absolute most. The entire nation reaches a critical and terrifying peak of energy consumption during the blazing afternoon hours. We are talking about critical hospitals and towering luxury hotels and massive apartment blocks and crowded shopping centers, all drawing their maximum electrical power at the exact same second. The hum of the national grid becomes a roar. How large must the electrical generation system become before cooling can be perfectly guaranteed across every single square meter of the country during those hottest hours? This is not about Saudi Arabia simply running out of electricity. The kingdom possesses immense energy resources and massive solar arrays. The danger lies in the absolute perfection required by the system. The power grid cannot just work most of the time. It has to work flawlessly when a failure would matter the most. A sudden blackout on a cool winter evening is a minor nuisance. A blackout during a 50-degree summer afternoon is a systemic societal threat. And this is the detail I find most disturbing when looking at the future of the region. The cooling network is a machine that is perpetually fighting the sky. The control room engineers and grid operators watching the national power load curve approach the red line know exactly what is at stake. They are not just managing electrons. They are managing human lives. The electrical grid is the beating heart, keeping the artificial atmosphere alive across the peninsula. But the grid is not only cooling the air you breathe inside your room, it is helping produce something even more fundamental for your basic survival. In Saudi Arabia, electricity does not only protect vulnerable people from hot air, it actually helps produce and physically move the vast majority of the water they drink every single day. More than 70% of the drinking water supply in the entire country is provided by massive, large-scale desalination infrastructure. They pull millions upon millions of gallons of raw salt water from the Red Sea and the Arabian Gulf. They then force that water through complex filtration membranes under immense pressure to remove the salt. It is undeniably an industrial miracle of the modern age. But that miracle is extremely energy-intensive. You cannot drink electricity, but without electricity, you cannot drink at all. This creates a terrifying closed loop of systemic dependencies. More extreme heat means people and buildings need more active cooling. More extreme heat also means people need significantly more drinking water to survive. Both the cooling networks and the water production facilities demand massive simultaneous surges in electricity. The brutal summer does not attack these critical systems one at a time in isolation. It attacks them all together simultaneously. The immediate danger is not one guaranteed spectacular national collapse. The true danger is the rapidly shrinking margin for error when several delicate survival systems face absolute peak demand together. A severe strain on the power grid could instantly become a severe strain on the water supply. The systems are bound together in a codependent relationship of survival. Machines like power plants and massive desalination facilities can always be enlarged. They can be reinforced and replaced with billions of dollars from the sovereign wealth fund. But one fundamental part of Saudi Arabia, and its grand Vision 2030, cannot simply be upgraded or replaced: the human body. The pilgrims of the 2024 tragedy faced extreme environmental exposure for a matter of days. Saudi Arabia currently operates a national construction campaign that must continue relentlessly for years and possibly decades. Across the vast empty desert, the kingdom is actively building the largest and most ambitious architectural megaprojects in human history. But a human worker can step into the shade to survive the afternoon heat. A strict project deadline cannot. Extreme heat completely changes the basic mathematics of building a nation. When the ambient temperature approaches 50 degrees, the laborers on the ground absolutely require more frequent cooling breaks and constant hydration. There are simply fewer safe working hours available in a standard day. To compensate for this biological limit, construction must often dramatically shift into the deep night, under massive towering floodlights. This massive logistical pivot completely rewrites the operational playbook. It fundamentally increases the pressure on management and makes project scheduling infinitely more difficult. Moving materials and coordinating thousands of workers in the dark can raise operational costs dramatically. Saudi Arabia certainly has the immense wealth to buy more heavy cranes. The kingdom can easily hire thousands of additional international contractors, but can it buy more safe operational hours from the blazing summer sun? Every single hour of daytime construction, permanently lost to extreme heat, is a small bleed of capital and momentum. You can see the reality of this struggle on the ground right now. Thick metal tools left in the sun that physically cannot be touched bare-handed without causing severe burns. Heavy machinery operating in blinding atmospheric glare that distorts the horizon. The aggressive timeline of Vision 2030 is constantly fighting the uncompromising reality of the thermometer. The sun acts as a permanent, overwhelming friction against human progress. But suppose Saudi Arabia simply absorbs the blow and pays the extra cost. Suppose they deploy infinite capital and brilliantly solve every single one of these logistical construction problems. Would that truly mean they have defeated the heat? To honestly answer that question, we must look closely at the ultimate symbol of Saudi ambition: the line. A proposed linear city stretching hundreds of kilometers across the harsh desert, designed to completely house millions of permanent residents. A structure of this unprecedented magnitude can certainly be designed for the desert environment using brilliant modern engineering. The exterior can be coated in reflective mirrored glass, but every single interior corridor and transit station and luxury apartment and public space inside it must remain perfectly habitable through the brutal, prolonged summer. Is the true engineering challenge actually building a massive city in the desert, or is the actual challenge building a city that can never ever be allowed to experience the desert outside? The physical building itself is not the final product being sold. The perfectly protected and heavily chilled artificial environment inside the building is the true product. Every single square inch of that vast interior requires constant, active mechanical management. Massive industrial ventilation shafts must push processed conditioned air continuously. Giant commercial chillers must violently reject the internal heat back into the already burning atmosphere outside. Clean water must be continuously pumped up to extreme heights. Thousands of maintenance crews must work around the clock in the hidden service corridors to ensure the fragile barrier between the inside and the outside never breaches for even a moment. When you look at these breathtaking architectural renders and promotional videos, you are looking at a promise that the internal atmosphere will always seamlessly triumph over the external reality. At first glance, Saudi Arabia appears to possess the ultimate definitive answer to climate extremes. They will simply build a much larger and much stronger and much wealthier protective machine. Saudi Arabia is entirely not powerless in this existential climate fight. The nation possesses extraordinary financial wealth and brilliant global engineering capacity, and an enormous economic incentive to rapidly adapt. They are successfully installing state-of-the-art district cooling systems beneath the streets. They are actively planting millions of trees for urban shade cover. They strictly enforce summer midday work bans to legally protect vulnerable laborers. They monitor heat metrics diligently, using advanced satellites. So perhaps the crisis can be completely solved, with enough money and human innovation. We can actually look to neighboring Dubai to clearly see the long-term future of this apparent victory. Over the past 2 decades, Dubai successfully built a global tourism and hospitality empire reliant entirely on artificial climate control. Premium luxury dining districts and massive sprawling indoor malls thrive specifically because the extreme outdoor heat is permanently locked outside the glass doors. But recent economic data from the Dubai tourism crisis reveals a deeply hidden and terrifying vulnerability. During the peak summer months, when the temperature spikes foot traffic to premium outdoor and semi-outdoor culinary districts plummets by up to 40%, the wealthy tourists simply refuse to step outside. The operational costs for these luxury restaurants and hotels surge dramatically because energy consumption jumps by nearly 30% just to overwork the air conditioning systems. They must aggressively cool the glass facades and keep the indoor ambient temperature perfectly comfortable for high-paying global guests. The profit margins in Dubai shrink rapidly beneath the crushing immense weight of these summer utility bills. Tourism numbers face intense seasonal depression because the environment outside the cooled bubble is completely intolerable. Adaptation did not remove the heat for Dubai. It merely transformed the environmental heat into an enormous, inescapable financial burden. Saudi Arabia is watching this exact economic reality unfold right next door. Yet they are boldly attempting to replicate this exact model on an exponentially larger scale with far more ambitious architectural projects. The victory over nature is entirely false. You do not ever defeat the extreme heat. You just change the form of the final bill. And this leads us directly to the most critical realization of the entire modern crisis. The real crisis may not be that Saudi Arabia cannot build beautiful monuments in temperatures above 50 degrees. They absolutely can, and they already are. The real crisis may be that everything they successfully build today must be permanently protected from those extreme temperatures forever. Think deeply about the true infinite cost of this victory. Every single square meter of new luxury development needs continuous active cooling. Every new massive cooling system needs continuous electricity. Much of the expanded national water system needs massive amounts of energy to run the desalination pumps. Every outdoor maintenance schedule for these megaprojects needs altered night hours and special biological protection for the workers. These heavy operational costs absolutely do not disappear when the festive ribbons are cut and the construction finally ends. This is the permanent heat tax. Saudi Arabia may win every single engineering battle against the heat and successfully complete every facet of Vision 2030. But in doing so, they will inherit a colossal mechanical beast that must be powered and watered and financially maintained until the end of human time. What happens when human survival itself becomes a permanent corporate operating expense? What happens to the national economic budget when the cost of simply existing indoors safely requires billions of dollars in perpetual energy subsidies? The exhausted people turning the wrenches and carefully monitoring the power loads in the control rooms already know this truth. The heat tax is invisible to the tourists, but it is the absolute heaviest thing the kingdom is currently building. It is a massive compounding financial and infrastructural obligation silently passed down to every single future generation. This massive generational obligation is being built at the exact moment the global environment is drastically shifting. The World Meteorological Organization clearly states in its latest findings that the Arab region is already warming significantly faster than the global average. Extreme heat is rapidly becoming a much larger and more aggressive systemic test for human health and vital civic infrastructure and long-term economic stability. Some neighboring nations in the Gulf have already recorded terrifying temperatures climbing well past the 50-degree threshold. We are seeing prolonged brutal periods of extreme heat, placing unprecedented and unpredictable pressure on fragile local ecosystems and national power grids alike. The heat waves are lasting longer and hitting harder. But Saudi Arabia absolutely does not need to wait until the end of the century to understand the sheer danger of this climatic trajectory. They do not need to sit in conference rooms and debate distant, complicated climate models. The ultimate physical warning has already physically arrived on their doorstep. It arrived with devastating clarity in the summer of 2024. In 2024, the individuals most tragically exposed to the brutal environment were those who simply could not reach the protective artificial cooling network in Mecca. The foundational challenge now facing Saudi Arabia is infinitely larger and vastly more complex. The government must guarantee and ensure that no civilian apartment or busy hospital or massive construction workforce or large public gathering or futuristic megacity is ever pushed outside that network. The kingdom has spent many decades brilliantly proving to the world that humans can build extraordinary and beautiful things in the middle of a remarkably harsh desert. But the next great historical test is not whether Saudi Arabia can merely build the future. It is whether the massive mechanical machine protecting that future can actually keep running flawlessly through every single brutal summer that follows. The margin for error is quietly and rapidly disappearing. Hajj lasted days. Saudi Arabia future must survive every summer. If you found this deep dive into the realities of extreme climate engineering eye-opening, please like this video and critically subscribe to the channel. Let us know in the comments below what you truly think about the massive infrastructure projects being aggressively built in the desert. The scenarios regarding infrastructure load and grid capacity presented in this documentary are analytical projections based entirely on current climate trends and regional economic data. They are specifically designed to illustrate systemic infrastructural dependencies and absolutely do not represent guaranteed future events or confirmed national failures.